kind of like going to the dentist and you know you need a root canal, but the dentist tells you all the history of your teeth, and it's just like it's too much to get to the main point.
When we talk about SEO, it is a zero-sum game. If you are not in those top 3 spots, you might as well be throwing money into the trash can. If you go into SEO not trying to be the best, it's a waste of time.
I think unless you're a self-service tool with a pretty low price point or an average customer value, it doesn't make sense to treat content marketing as synonymous with SEO. I think you're missing a lot of opportunity for partner marketing, for branding, for things that feed into dark funnel, but would kind of give your whole company a lift in the long run.
When you're in a content marketing position, you need to think about who you are telling the story to. What do they need in their lives? How can you help them? Then once you figure out who your audience is and how you can help them, then you should create the story. Then you should look to the medium.
before I do, are we live?
We are live. We are.
Are we?
We are live.
Okay.
We are making it work. If you're looking at the,
I don't see it.
yeah, there's a different URL that we're working on. But
We
we
have
are
a
live.
different URL now.
I'm
Okay,
watching.
okay, got it. All right, understood. I will stop checking. Yes. So my content marketing philosophy is honestly very similar at first to what one of your recent guests said, whose stream I was accidentally on just now. So I guess it wasn't an accident. Devin Reed, I think he said something like he thinks of content as trust building at scale.
Mm-hmm.
I think of content as relationship building at scale, which is similar but a little different, right? In terms of, I always think about the humans behind things, right? And in terms of actually trying to build a good relationship. And what do you need to build a good relationship, right? You have to have something in common. You have to be trustworthy. That is part of it. You have to want to do something together. There should be some sort of benefit to maintaining a relationship and putting time and effort into it.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be consistent. There's usually the time element, right? And you have to be memorable, right? You don't want your friends to be interchangeable. You don't want your coworkers to all be interchangeable, that you wouldn't notice if I'm talking to Tommy or suddenly I'm talking to Ronnie Higgins or something. I want to be able to tell which one's which, right? Like
Right.
the people in my life. And it's the same thing with companies, right? And with content. You're basically essentially using content to communicate with people asynchronously at scale as a company. And you want to have all the same things: trust, consistency, be memorable. You want to stand out. You want to be unique. You want to be useful. You want to put in the effort for them and make sure that people actually want to put in the effort for you, and you give them something to continue giving you time and attention and continue remembering you and continue coming back, right? And everything else falls out of that. I would say it's one of the main creative writing principles, or one of the main principles in a lot of the arts, that the more specific you are, the more relatable it becomes. That is something that I think a lot of marketers fail to realize, especially in B2B, right? We want to appeal to as many people as possible because we're afraid of losing traffic, we're afraid of losing leads, we're afraid of losing business opportunities. So we end up going to the general. We end up trying to appeal to the lowest common denominator. We end up trying to speak to everybody at once, and it doesn't work, because the more generic you are, the less anybody has to actually pick up on, right?
Yep.
Versus if you read a good story or you watch a good movie, it's a very specific story, right? It's about somebody. It's about a person interacting with other people, doing very specific things. It's about their circumstances, a certain time and place. And yet we feel it, right? When I watch a great movie, I feel like I'm in it. I feel the emotions. I feel like I care about all of those people, even when they're fictional, even when they have some nothing to do with me, right? I might be watching a drama that's set in, like, I don't know, medieval Europe or something, right? I've never been to medieval Europe or been a princess or peasant, and yet I'm watching it and I relate to it because the emotions are human, because the questions it asks are questions that I also ask. And I think that is something we're missing so desperately in a lot of marketing. And we're failing to capture the impact that content could have
I think
within that.
I think one of the things that stands out to me, especially because the standard advice, right, is do the keyword research, right? The stuff we entered the show with, right? Do the keyword research, do the interviews, do the surveys and whatnot. And I think one of the things that I've found over time, and I know you've put this out there on LinkedIn before, so I'm going to try to bait the question just a little bit here, but it's reading between the lines, right? We get all of this information, but I think the big thing that we miss is reading between the lines on what people are saying, and being able to connect. That's the thing that gets people to connect, is if we're able to do that. I'd love to talk about how I do that, but I'd love to get your take on that, and then we can just kind of like go back and forth on that. All of our technical issues seem to be fixed now, by the way, which is great.
Amazing. I'm so glad, because I was getting notifications from my team saying they really want to watch my webinar because I guess they don't get enough of me as it is. So I hope they're here. Hi, if you are. But I think the answer is in what you've said. It's the purpose of reading between the lines. It's to connect, right? It's remembering that we're trying to connect. And we're not trying to connect with just these nebulous entities that we often think of in business, right? I like to say that business is just a bunch of people in a trench coat of a company, right? And you're still trying to connect to a human,
Yeah.
right? And what do you do when you try to connect? Think about trying to make an impression at a party. Think about trying to connect with somebody on a date. Think about being at a coffee chat or a networking chat, right? How do you try to connect with that person, right? I often say that it's better to write for one person, one very specific person, and then go from there than to try to appeal to a group. Because again, the more specific you are, the more general it is. I often have in my head a reader, a specific person that I write content for, and it changes.
It does change. So
yeah,
I'm in a different camp. And this is
Ooh,
where it's fun. Yeah.
Let's go. Love that.
So I don't believe necessarily in writing for one specific reader. I think that can be limiting in some degree. Because, and what I try to think about is the network effect of how a piece of content is going to spread, right? So I try not to write for, Mariya, right? I will try to write for Mariya's team. And then how will Mariya's team share that with some other team, and what Slack channels will this type of content be shared in? And when it comes to like the audience research part, the reading between the lines, something like I try to think about, and I know you've read this because of your online newsletter, is the wants versus needs, right? A lot of what people want, we look into that and say like, oh, they want this topic. That's what the keyword research says. That's what the surveys say. That's what all of this says. But what they need is often unspoken or even unknown to them, right? So, here's an example from my part, and give me your take on this, because like I need to know if like I'm a crazy person when it comes to all this.
Or we're both crazy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'll take it. So,
yeah.
So the want is like, I want to learn how to build a landing page, right? Like how to build a landing page. That's my kind of go-to example with that, because I think every single person in marketing has written that article. And you might be like, how to build a landing page. Make sure you have your imagery and good headlines and good body copy and all of that. But then the need behind that is like, well, is the company going down, right? Are they trying to, is the person reading this trying to get a win? Are they, and then what else do they need, right? They need to learn, they need to know that copywriting is hard. The photography part is hard. Like there's a lot of political buy-in and all of this stuff. And that's, for me, that comes from that audience research, right? Talking to people, but then also kind of getting them to say something that I would want to do, or I want them to. I guess the question is like, when you're having these conversations with people, right? Like, I've kind of already asked this, but I'm going to like dig into that a little bit more. How are you getting them to say the things that are going to give you those insights? Even if it's a one-to-one thing, because that is something that still helps the content spread, because it does connect personally.
Yeah, and I don't think you're crazy, or, well, I think we're both crazy, because I agree with the whole wants versus needs thing.
Yeah.
And actually figuring out what is the psychological need, what is the context behind wanting to learn facts, right? That is something that pisses me off in content often, when we just throw facts together and we think the facts speak for themselves. They don't.
Right.
Because as you've said, people often don't even know what they need. They don't really realize what they want. And before I go into questions, I did want to comment on the whole writing for a team versus one person.
Yep.
I want to challenge you.
Okay.
If I'm writing for Tommy's team or something, right? Why can't I frame it as I'm writing for Tommy so he shares it with his team?
Yep.
Or I'm writing for Tommy so he thinks it's valuable to share it with his team. I'm still writing for one person, right? But I'm writing for them to want to share it, right? And I feel like that just specificity and kind of narrowing it, it's almost a creative constraint, right?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously we're going to include more context at the end, but for first drafts especially, I feel like the creative constraint of imagining the one human and wanting them to share it, wanting them to talk about it, it helps a lot, right? And then how do I get there is asking hard questions, often digging in.
Yep.
Right? It's about hearing something, noticing a pattern, right? I look for patterns all the time. I look for exceptions all the time, right? So one of my favorite things to find, whether it is looking at SparkToro's audience research data, being at an interview, talking to somebody one-on-one, looking at forum discussions, is what doesn't fit, what seems like it doesn't belong here. So for instance, if everybody's talking about landing pages and it's like a Reddit discussion, and people are saying, yeah, you want it to be specific, you want to have keywords, you want to optimize it, you want to have images, you want to do this and that. And then one person says something out of left field, like, I think that the best landing pages are only, I don't know, I'm trying to make up an example on the spot here. The best landing pages are the ones that surprise you or something, that say something you don't expect, right? And I'm like, why is that here? This is different. Everything else is very tactical. Everything else is very like, do this, follow this. And this person's suddenly talking about a totally different facet. That is the moment I usually stop. I would screenshot that, I would save that, and I would start paying attention to that. I would try to look into that. I'd see if there are other responses. If I can find something like that, I'd ask myself, why does this not fit? Right? So, for example, when you research marketers on SparkToro or something, right, and you get all of this data on all of the marketing websites that they follow, there's also usually some business websites, there's some website developer sites, like website design, and then you see something like, I don't know, everybody plays poker or something, right? I haven't seen something like that, but I've seen things similar that make no sense at all. And it's like, okay, why in the world are all of these marketers playing poker? And if you dig into it, you might often find something fascinating. For example, you might end up with an article that compares content marketing to poker and how the rules of poker apply here. And now suddenly this applies to a bunch of people. Or you might realize that the thinking behind poker, right, and having to think psychologically, having to hide your cards, having to kind of read the room is a similar skill set to marketers, right? And now suddenly you understand the audience a lot better because you're thinking, why would the same people be interested in both of these seemingly completely unconnected things, right? And it's that kind of thinking. It's constantly trying to dig in. What are they doing? What are they thinking? If you're a creative writer, thinking, how would I make a character out of them? What would I need to know that they might not know about themselves? What are they thinking? When? How? How does that influence their actions?
So there's something I want to touch on in just a minute here. But back when I was in the very early days of Facebook, right, I had a client. They were a Mexican restaurant, and they were fantastic, and they had this very family-friendly vibe and approach. And what we found, Facebook had at the time what people are also interested in data available to you. And what we found, it was like, they were into Disney movies, and they were, family vacations, and they like to do all sort, like, here are the different things specifically that they were into. And it's exactly what you're talking about, where it's like, oh, well, what can I extract from these little bits of information on how to package the data, or how to package my message in a way that's both familiar but also unique to what it is that we're trying to do. I'm going to circle back to something that you said, and I can't gloss over it. Hard questions. Give me an example of some hard questions. There's a hard question all on its own.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. I usually like asking people, why do you believe that? All right. So when somebody tells me, when I'm doing an interview, right, with a subject matter expert from a client's team, and they're telling me, well, the best way to do data analytics is to collaborate with a team, right? That was a point that one of our clients would say all the time. I would ask, why do you think that's important? Why is that the best way? How do you know that that's true, right? And then they explain their reasoning, and usually I'd ask again, like, why? Why do you think that it's most important that people can share information easily or something? Why is that important for data analytics? Can you do it without that, right? It's almost the mindset of the 5-year-old that keeps asking why, right? Like, why is the sky blue? Because it is, right? It's like, but why? Because your eyes see it that way. Why do my eyes see it that way? And usually after a couple of rounds of that, you do get to something really interesting, and that is the thing to dig into. I like circular questioning, like almost like asking the same question again and again to dig in and continuing to look like I'm not impressed to make the person talk. It works. It works pretty well.
Now, why do you like circular questioning? I mean, why is that?
Well, because it makes people actually explain their reasoning, right? It makes them dig in. It makes them think harder, because You get the pressure like I do right now. I'm live. You ask me a question. I want to sound smart
Right.
because I'm here as an expert or whatever. And I feel like I have to say something. So now my brain's working overtime. Like, why do I believe that? Why do I think that? Right. And that's when you can dig into things. And often people come up with beliefs that were more unconscious because it's not the first answer that they jump to. It's not the rehearsed answer. It's something they come up with on the spot. And often that's more real.
Yeah. And it's kind of, I mean, it applies to, I think it applies to all things right now. A lot of content in the B2B space is all very surface level, right?
Yeah, shallow.
And it's shallow, I think partly because those extra layers come from asking those tougher questions. I'm in the middle of a project right now, and we just did several customer interviews with folks because we're revamping the entire communication strategy. And it's been really interesting to dig just a layer deeper and then start to codify this stuff, because now we can add layers to our content that don't currently exist. So Ronnie says here, so what you're saying is toddlers are expert interviewers. Yes.
They are.
Yes.
Have you ever had to answer questions from a toddler or like a preschooler? They are going to blow your mind. You're going to realize you're so stupid.
Yeah. It's true. It's true. I've had questions about like the universe and stuff like that, and it's like, wow. Yeah.
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 It's things like, why do we get dressed in the morning? Why can't I go to school in my pajamas? It's like, why can't you go to school? I don't know.
That's exactly
Maybe
right.
you can.
I would love it if you could.
Right?
Yeah.
Right?
I tell my kids, like,
Yeah.
I used to go to karaoke in my full pajama suit. So I tell them, you can do whatever you want, man.
I love it.
So Sunil says, the circular questioning thing will help me so much next week when I will be interviewing someone. Yeah, it's true. It's true.
Yeah. Sorry.
So when you're, I'm going to keep going in the circular question because now we're here, right? Now we're in it.
Now you're putting me on the spot. Yeah.
Now we're in it. So when you're going through the circular questioning process and you are digging just a layer deeper in each time, when do you know when to quit? Like what's the stopping point? And actually, I'm going to add something to that before I answer that. Something else that's really important to think about when you're doing face-to-face type interviews is reading micro expressions. That's also something that is very valuable. And if you haven't, audience, if you haven't done any reading up on micro expressions, I absolutely think you should. Body language micro expressions helps out so much.
Tone of voice.
Yep.
Tone of voice is very important. Yeah. Well, what I've found, and this doesn't happen all the time, but it happens most of the time, is when you first start the circular questions, the first 2 rounds, they're going to repeat the same thing. They're going to keep wanting you to be satisfied with the initial answer because it's stress, it's pressure. They keep wondering if they just didn't say it enough, right? And once they realize what game you're playing, right? Once they realize you're looking for a deeper answer, they'll start giving you other explanations. That's when you're digging in.
Yeah.
And you stop when either they are repeating things again because that means there's nothing else to dig or they can't come up with anything else, or when whatever they've answered has given you an avenue for another question, right?
Yeah.
So I often end up stopping before people are done talking about something because I've gotten enough to go down a different avenue that's often more interesting.
Now,
because the circular questioning is a path to better questions.
It's true. And have you noticed that once you get past those initial first layers, because this is something that I've noticed too, is like, once you get past those first layers, the rest of the conversation can become a little bit more vulnerable.
Yes, I always say that what actually happens, and you can see the look in people's eyes changes, their tone changes, often they get more animated, actually. And what I describe it as is they've realized that I actually give a shit about what they're saying.
Yeah.
They've realized I actually want to know. I'm not checking a box.
Yeah.
Because in business, we are used to people asking us surveys, asking us, pop-up questions, asking us interviews just to check a box.
Yep.
We know that they might have a spreadsheet. We know that they're just trying to do this many interviews. Sometimes they're just trying to prove an idea they've already had. And people have this initial layer of suspicion. They're almost jaded, right? They feel like you don't actually care about listening to them. So what you're really trying to get to is, no, I really am. I really want to know about this. I want to know how you think. And once they believe you, once they've seen that you do, because you're not satisfied with the cookie cutter boilerplate answers, that's when the conversation often starts, like truly.
How do you avoid leading questions?
Ooh, I don't always avoid them.
Okay. All right. Keep going.
I don't think we necessarily have to avoid them. We're marketers. We still have a goal, right? Like, I'm not here as a scientist. I'm not here to have the most objective piece in the world. Not at all. I'm here to have a strong piece with an opinion and bias. I know I'm biased. My clients are biased. Half of what I'm doing is I'm trying to pull that bias out of the client so we can represent it in the content.
Yeah.
So I don't care about leading questions. Sometimes I ask them. It depends on how the conversation goes. I don't think they're necessarily a bad thing when you're trying to write something persuasive.
Awesome. Do you have any and I want to start talking about other types of research in just a minute here, but do you have any good resources for the face-to-face research? Like, who are your inspirations for this?
Oh, Ronnie Higgins, who is in the chat, I believe, gave me this recommendation for this amazing book about asking questions. Wait, let me figure out what the title was. I read it just recently, but I was blown away by how well it explained all of this stuff. There it is. It's called Stop Asking Questions.
Yes.
And yeah,
I love that book.
That one. It's so good. It's so good. I really like that. So I'd say that one. Then,
by Andrew Warner, folks, by the way.
Yes, by Andrew Warner.
Of the
so there's two. So
Mixergy podcast.
Yeah, this is an old edition because I picked this up at a secondhand bookstore. I would recommend getting the newest one. I have the loved and tabbed. It's called Crucial Conversations, and it's all about just talking to people in general, in any situation, but it's also very good for interviews. One of the main things that they talk about is that in any conversation, you have to establish safety. And you have to keep watching for signs that the other person might feel unsafe, because if they feel unsafe, they're not going to talk. They're not going to listen. And you're not going to get to the real root of things. So I think having that skill of watching, right, micro expressions, tone of voice, what are they saying? Are they comfortable? Are they uncomfortable? You might need to stop and do some chit chat to ease them back into it, right? You want to maintain that safe, friendly conversational environment. I think that's so important. And then one more that I really like is also an old book. It's called How to Talk with Practically Anybody About Practically Anything by Barbara Walters,
nice.
The legendary journalist that died recently. And it's just a bunch of stories of how she would interview people and talk to people. And I honestly think it's fantastic.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm also, we've got frantically taking notes in the chat here, and I am also frantically taking notes. I'm always trying to focus on or improve the craft of interviewing. So that's, yeah.
You're a good interviewer. You ask hard questions. That's half the game, honestly. Just don't settle for easy questions. Keep going.
Thank you. It's really easy to phone in. I will say, there are times where you have to come at this with a high level of energy. There have been episodes where I know I didn't bring my A game because I was really tired. I had stuff going on. And that's part of what happens. But then also it's did I get the best episode out of that? Right? There's a downstream effect for me personally, and I hate to talk about me, but there's a downstream effect where it's okay, but I didn't get any good clips to run in my intro, right? And now what do I even have to market this episode? Because there was I didn't get the best out of my interviewer or interviewee. So but thank you for that.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So tell me about your process, right? We've talked a lot about the or talked about the interview part of the process. Tell me about your process from ideation to publication. So what I want to sort of base this assumption off of too, before we get into the question itself, right, is we've done a large body of interviewing, right?
Yeah.
Now let's talk about how you're extracting information from other data sources and then how that plays a role in your ideation to the creation to the publication.
Yeah. So I like switching between kinds of data sources as I'm working on content, and especially as we're planning things.
Okay.
Because I feel like in the switching mindset, switching different kinds of information that you're working with, you notice commonalities. And again, you notice patterns, and you're better able to understand everything, right? So for example, before we plan an interview, I'm often looking at data. I'm often looking at something like SparkToro, something like SEMrush, something like Google Trends. I'm all over in the numbers and looking at aggregated data. And that is what helps me plan my questions, because I look at keywords, I look at things that keep popping up, I look at anomalies, right, patterns as I described before. Then I plan questions based on that. Then I have the interview, and then after the interview, I think, right, has this given me new avenues to go look something new up in SparkToro or SEMrush or whatever? Do I have a new search query, right, that I want to look up? Is there a different source that I wanted to look at, a different site that I now want to look at because something was mentioned that reminded me of it, right? Mm-hmm. Is there something that clashed with what I looked at before that I saw in the interview now? And as I'm doing this kind of thinking, switching back and forth, that helps me understand both the aggregated quantitative data better, but it also helps me understand the interview better, right? Because people aren't existing in a vacuum. Your audience is not in a vacuum. All of this information is, if you're doing it right, about the similar group of people. And so you're trying to kind of compile this psychological profile of your audience across everything, right? And that also includes internal notes, right? So we will often go to sales calls and be like, okay, how did our interviews match the things the sales team believed, right? Or the things that we've seen there? Does this match customer support tickets? Does this match things we've said in other content? Does this match what the audience posts on their social feeds, right? Everything kind of comes together, and I like switching between and seeing, is this the same? Is something off? Because if one source contradicts everything else, that means I have to look into that and see why. Did we interview the wrong person? Did we look at the wrong thing? Or does this mean that actually this does connect and we missed a deeper layer here, right?
Yep. So
that's a lot of what we do. And I would say we're ready to write. It's so hard to say when. It's the vibe more than anything. It's just that at a certain point, I realized that I know enough about this audience that if somebody were to ask me about them, right? If you were to come to me and you were to start asking me, so how do outsourcing lead generation services work? Like, what do they care about, right? Because that's one of my clients. And I can just start saying things to you.
Yeah.
I can be like, yeah, people care about this and they miss that. And, no, that's not quite right. And just casually having that intuition, then we're ready. Then we're ready to make content, because then we just understand them enough that we have this internal barometer that as we're planning content, as we're writing content, auditing content, evaluating content, we can now measure it against ourselves. So we almost turn ourselves into like little barometers. We're adjusting it, we're calibrating it. And once it's calibrated with the audience research, now you can do your work. You're ready.
I like to call that triangulating on the truth, right?
Yeah, I love that. That's great.
My little marketing phrase, right? But like, it's truth with a capital T, because you start to see you start to see those patterns. You start to see where people aren't getting what they need out of certain things, and then you're able to create stuff that connects on a deeper level. And you've had really great experience with this with one of your articles from Search Engine Land back last year. It was a response to the hit piece that somebody put out on The Verge about the content marketing community, or the SEO community. And what was the response to that? Because there was definitely a lot to work with there. And I know from personal experience, you were asking for people's take on the whole conversation. What did that look like specifically? Because I know that resonated with a lot of folks. And I know that you had, I've experienced firsthand part of what that research process was like before you went into that piece.
Yeah. Are you asking more about the research process and creating it, or how people responded once it was published?
A little bit of both, right? Like as it was being created, and then, what was the overall response? Because the response was way bigger than just the people you were talking to about it. And I think that's important, because that's ultimately the goal. We want this sort of big bang effect that happens after you get this kernel of truth that you're focusing into one thing.
Yeah. So in researching it, I kind of went crazy for a few days. I went crazy for a week. Honestly, I was a mad woman.
You were mad too.
I was mad and I was crazy. I was both. So I was just in this article. I couldn't think about anything else. Basically, everything I saw, everything I looked at, whether we would pull up a YouTube commentary video, right? I would be playing a racing video game. I'd just be talking to my family at lunch. Everything somehow in my head connected back to The Verge and why I was mad at them and why we needed search. Like anytime anybody Googled anything around me, I was like, We care about search, you know? And what I do when I'm in these states is I have a note, I have a note open on my phone, on my notes app that syncs across device, and I just keep writing things. I like drop links. I write half like incoherent ramblings. You know, it looks like the diary of somebody at an asylum, basically, is what it looks like. But that's just what I do. I just record, I compile everything, and then I'm like, okay, I'm ready to sit down once all the quotes are in, once I've researched things. And I just have these monster crazy documents of just all the thoughts, all the links, all the disparate things. And I'm like, okay, how do I structure this?
Yep.
And then it's like hours of building an outline, and a very, very, very general outline. It's just H1, H2, maybe sometimes an H3, and nothing past that. Like, I don't allow myself to do that. And then I look at that, I'm like, okay, does this reflect everything? Do I feel like I need something else? And once the outline's ready, I start copy pasting quotes. I start copy pasting like the other sources I had, other thoughts I had into the outline where it fits, you know, adapt the outline as I need to, and then I actually write. The writing is usually one sitting. Usually I don't stand up for like 2 to 3 hours, right? And I just write, but it takes forever to get to the writing. It's like hours and hours and hours before I ever am writing. I'm researching most of the time. And for that piece in particular, it was easy to do the audience research because I'm in the community, right? I'm also one of the people who was targeting the Verge hit piece. I was mad already. I had already talked to a bunch of people, right? So one of the first things was I read every response I could find. I got quotes from a bunch of people. I looked through the quotes, and it was kind of trying to balance my thoughts on it versus everybody else's, because I didn't want this to be Mariya's mad. I wanted it to be a response from the community as presented by Mariya. Right. And it was a hard balance to pull. It was like, I need some ego, but not too much ego. Right. I don't want to make this all about myself. And the response to it was amazing. I would say my favorite part about it was I was so worried about how long it was, because I believe it's a 40-minute read. It's 8,000 or 9,000 words, something stupid like that. I was like, oh my God, search engine land, they're going to tell me cut this down. They're going to be like, what are you doing? They didn't. They published the whole thing. And when it got published, like, why did they do this? Nobody's going to read this now. All my work is wasted. And within hours, I was getting messages from people being like, I read the whole thing. I read the whole thing twice. And it was a Friday morning. Like during Friday on a work day, people are sitting down and reading for an hour. Yeah, reading for an hour this long piece. And I'm like, okay, I nailed this. Like the fact that people are reading to the end is honestly enough, right? And then I did get a ton of responses. I know the stats on it were really good. It's like way above the average readership for most SEO articles. Like I know that it crossed the average very quickly. I know that it was ranking really well, but all of that was more confirming what I already felt, which was just the initial buzz, the initial reactions, having people respond, and having people respond in a way that made it clear that they read it. Because sometimes you might have an announcement and everyone on LinkedIn comments, oh yeah, I'm really looking forward to reading this. But if you don't hear from anybody who has read it, then it's like, something's off. So for Search Engine Land, for example, I always ask them for my average session time on my articles. I care about that almost more than the readership, because I want to make sure our people reading.
It's funny when I am in editor mode, I look at scroll depth, I look at the average read time and things like that, because those are your engagement metrics, right?
I often set scroll as a conversion in Google Analytics.
That's a whole nother conversation right there about publishing analytics, but and I want to point this out because I think this is important. The audience research that you're doing, right? And the more research that a person can do when it comes to the subject matter, when it comes to the BS, like any of that stuff, that to me helps me fall in love with the material.
Yes.
Even if it's not something that I'm absolutely in love with in the beginning, that research is so necessary, because one of the reasons why that post in particular stood out, right? It was this Big Bang effect, right? Where, I kind of said that before, but you have all of this material that it sorts to compress into a single piece. You put it out there into the world, and then it's like, bang, your passion like goes through the entire thing. And I think that's really important. I'm going to take a little sidebar for a second here, and then we need to get into the pregame, and then we need to get into the edit. I realize we're very over time right now, but that's okay.
I'm very talkative.
the the thing that I read an article once, and I wish I could find it. I read an article about paint drying, right? Like the author challenged themselves. I had a conversation with them afterwards about paint drying. They challenged themselves to do a really good article on this. And what it ended up becoming was this stream of consciousness thought process of the actual like scientific thing that's happening while paint is drying, while also weaving in this kind of personal narrative of how this person was thinking, because they were taking this visual, they were bringing you to this point of like, I am staring at a wall right now, so this is the stuff that's going on in my mind. And it was this like interplay between the two things, and I was like, this is fascinating, and I wish I could find it still, but it was like, this is absolutely fascinating because the research was there overall. So
I am so happy hearing that, because that matches very well where my philosophy comes from too.
yeah.
Do you know what I think is the best like segment or the best subgenre of content on all of the internet right now? What I personally think is the best, most skillful?
Go for it. Tell me. I don't know.
YouTube video essays.
Yes.
And the reason I say that is because YouTubers, the ones that do video essays, the ones that are good at it, have nailed this very impressive thing that's the same as that article about paint drying, it seems, where you can watch a 4-5 hour video of somebody talking about something extremely hyper specific, often something you've never heard of before, and you're fascinated. Masters of this, I would say, is H Bomber Guy. Amazing about it. I don't care about anything he ever talks about. I love all his videos, right?
Yeah.
Philosophy Tube is great. ContraPoints. There's one who I really, really admire, and right now I'm spacing on his name because I literally reference him in my newsletter all the time. Oh my god. Jacob Geller.
Yep.
Jacob Geller is my favorite. I copy him constantly in my style of writing. I will admit to it. I am constantly plagiarizing his style. Like, I love it. I love it so much. Right? And it's like, I think somebody's skillful if they can make me care about something that I usually don't give a shit about.
Yeah.
Right? Somebody that's a good example of this more classically in literature is David Foster Wallace.
Oh,
he has
yes.
like Considered the Lobster. He has this cruise essay. It's things like that, right? It's, yeah, can they take the most boring specific topic and make me fall in love with it, make me curious, make me feel why this is worth talking about. I love it.
I dig it.
Yeah.
One of my favorite channels, I haven't watched it in a while, but Nerdwriter does a really good job of that.
Yes, Nerdwriter is very good.
Every Frame of Painting. They don't publish any more Anatomy of a Screenplay, like or Lessons from the Screenplay. Like, these are all like I focus a lot on the screenplay stuff, but those are ones that really stand out, and I love those.
I like Nerdwriter a lot.
Ronnie says R.I.P. Okay, so we've done the work, right? We've had the process, we've done the research, we've done the work. Tell me about your pregame before you sit down to edit. And I want to be very specific too about the pregame process rather than the actual editing process, because you've done the work. Now you're going, okay, now I have to edit this thing down. What does that look like for you?
Again, I'm a mad woman. I'm weird. Often I end up editing in the middle of the night.
Okay.
When everything's quiet. So I kind of wait for a moment when it feels right to edit, when it feels like I can actually focus and dig in and I won't be dragged away by everyday life, right? So I like to hole up. I like to hide somewhere. I like for it to be dark in the middle of the night or early in the morning when nobody's awake, or for some reason everyone's taking a nap for lunch or something. Like, I want the world to be quiet.
Yep.
I want to feel like the world has evaporated and it's just me and the piece and ideas and nothing else. Like, that is the ideal editing state that I look for. And it helps that my office in this apartment is very much far away. I can hole up, close the door, nobody disturb me, right? And then I pick the music. The music's very important to me. I have music on all of my newsletters, and I have a playlist of them that I compiled because I often have music that I set for separate moods. I have playlists that I just reference. Very often when I'm editing, I play the same playlist, which is anime music that I like.
Okay.
It's my favorite anime and Japanese music, and it's all like really hype anime music that's just like, okay, let's go, right? I'm just like, ready, let's do it. And then I edit.
It's funny, I've heard sort of, this is one of my favorite questions because it just kind of gives a little bit of insight.
Yeah.
I've heard everything from like deep heavy metal music to like the Lord of the Rings soundtrack to now anime, which is pretty awesome. I can't listen to anything. I just do my best to not edit and sit here in an existential crisis of how much work is going to be done to make sure that this thing is what I want it to be. All right, cool. Let's move on.
People are different.
I am going to let's go to the mid-roll here. So we're going to take a bit of an ad break right now. I'm going to show one of my new favorite tools called Content Harmony. Yeah, take a look at this. If you hate writing briefs, if the brief writing process is completely tedious to you, then you absolutely want to check this tool out because it will change everything. See you on the other side. While we wait for the edit, I wanted to introduce you to one of my new favorite tools. It's called Content Harmony, and here's why it's my new favorite. First, I hate writing content briefs just because of how much time it takes. If you want to get the information you need, you have to bounce between so many different tools. You've got the keyword data from one tool. You need to use Google to see who you're going up against. You need to know what their domain authority is. You have to figure out the average word count. What's the keyword density? What are the search trends? And so much more. And let's be honest, we don't do it all because it takes too long. Now that's where Content Harmony comes in. First, all you have to do is upload your key phrases, and its AI-assisted tool will show you at a glance the search intent of each key phrase, the average word count across all the top ranking results, how optimized the average piece is, the average links to each piece, and the average domain authority across all the competitors. And when you click into a key phrase, you get even more detailed information, such as the search intent of each key phrase, the age range of the ranking results, the SERP features, and the keyword seasonality and trends. You can also do a topic analysis and see the keyword density that you should be targeting, the outline of each article that ranks in the SERP, questions people are actually asking with information from Google, Quora, Reddit, and more, and the common external links that people are citing, your top internal link targets, high authority resources, and recent news to keep your results fresh. Also, you can get way more detailed information on each of your SERP competitors. You can see what images are ranking and what videos are also going out there. And here's the cool part. All you have to do is click any of these elements and it will automatically populate a brief, which you can then share with anyone. And finally, once you get the first draft back, you can run it through their content grader and see just how well optimized the article is. Seriously, I just started using it and it's saving me at least 2 hours a brief and has consolidated 4 of my most commonly used tools. Now, if you want to try it out for yourself, you can run 10 reports for $10. Also, you can help support the channel and get 2 months of free bonus credits when you purchase the full plan through my link. All right, now let's jump back into the edit.
Yeah, so Tommy shared this piece with me yesterday, and the first thing I did was email him being, is this an article from SEMrush? And the reason why was because we have been working with SEMrush on a project for a little bit over a month now, but it hasn't been public information. In fact, this is the first time I'm talking about it publicly. I've said it one-on-one to people because we're pitching them for some PR stuff, right? So I have to mention it, but I didn't have permission to say anything yet. So when I saw this, I'm like, oh my God, do I have to talk about this and pretend I'm not working with them? Or can I say it? This might be a good time to say it. Oh.
There we go. Audience should be able. Okay.
Can you hear me? Hello.
Ronnie said he had to refresh the audio to work, but he can hear it working. And
Hello.
yeah, you should be going through now
Yeah,
too.
we're good. All
I
right.
think so.
Am I going through? Can everyone hear me? Hi.
There's a bit of a delay between here and the
A bit of
broadcast.
delay.
So
Okay. Have they said that they can hear me?
my levels on you are good. So
Okay. All right. Do I need to restart the whole explanation, or where did we cut out?
yeah, we'll restart from the
Okay.
top. Thank you so much, everybody, by the way, for being very patient with us.
We're sorry.
For the technical difficulties. All right, yeah, cool. We're up. Ronnie says he heard
Woo!
the SEMrush backstory, but
Oh, he did. Okay. Well, just TLDR, basically wasn't allowed to announce that we were working with SEMrush publicly yet. And then I saw this article, so I ended up messaging the client like urgently, and they were based in Europe, so they were about to go to bed. I'm like, urgent, this is tomorrow. Can I talk about you, please? And thankfully they said yes. So yeah, I can talk about it, and I left my comments knowing that I could mention that we work with them, because obviously I know some behind the scenes, right, on their strategy, what they're thinking about. And that kind of made this more fun to edit. So I'm very glad that this is what happened.
and now we're able to have the logo on your website too. So see?
Yeah,
win
exactly.
all around.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So what was your first impression of this piece? Because the article is what is audience research? Figure we have a little bit of a meta conversation here about this.
I will be real. I was sad. I was sad about this piece because having been playing with SEMrush's tools for the past month, right? Because like once we started working together, I got access to a bunch of it to play around with it. And I'm the big audience research software nerd, right? Everybody hears me talking to Sparkdoor all the time. So I was like, ooh, what's here, right? And I've been blown away by how cool the tool is and all the data that it has. And seeing this article, basically pretending that it's not a SEMrush article, pretending it's just some article out there in the ether about audience research, and not using anything from what is like interesting about SEMrush, the kind of data they have, the kind of things their team knows about. They have a phenomenal team. It's just, I'm looking at this and I'm like, why? Why? There's so many missed opportunities in this article. Like, I kept feeling like every paragraph was a missed opportunity to do something amazing. And that just pissed me off because I know they could have.
All right.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you a question that is
Yeah.
not related specifically to this article, but that happens a lot with a lot of software companies.
Yeah.
I know that we had missed opportunities when I was at QuickBooks. Why do you think that happens? What do you think that is? What's the...
It's people misunderstand why everybody hates salespeople. That's what it is, right? Because we're all, as marketers, we're afraid of coming off as salesy, as sleazy, as annoying. And these are very valid concerns. We don't want to be annoying, but people misunderstand why it's annoying. It's not annoying to talk about your product or what your company does. People know they're on a corporate website. People are often interested in something because if your product serves a genuine need, people want to know about it, right? There's nothing wrong with that. The problem is when you talk about it in a way that's self-serving, in a way that's not appropriate, your timing is off, your tone is off, but it's not the fact that you're plugging your product.
Right.
It's that it's unnatural. It's that it's forced.
Right.
Right. And I think people don't get that distinction, so they lean way too far to the other side. It's like, it feels like articles are playing a game of let's hope nobody looks at the top of this webpage to see what website this is on. And it's like, why? I can see the URL right here.
It's funny.
You know?
I used to be of the camp because I've switched camps. And an audience, I would love to hear where your take on this is now, because it is an ideological thing that is within our community. I used to be of the camp that no, we don't talk about the product at all because we have the URL on top and people can see that there's a logo, right? So of course there's going to be some sort of connection to what we do with the product. My whole outlook on that changed when we did a survey when I was at QuickBooks, and people were saying that they wish that product was incorporated a little bit more because they're there to have a solution to the problem, and they don't want to know the long way to fix the solution or fix the problem. They want to have a solution presented to them, and I think there are a handful of really good blogs that do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, audience, I would love to hear your perspective. Like, where do you fall ideologically? Where do you fall in that spectrum? All right, let's move into the piece. We've got this first. Audience research is a vital part of marketing and advertising. This is a big pet peeve of mine.
Yeah, I get mad about this. I wrote a whole search engine land article being just mad at introductions because of this exact thing,
Mm-hmm.
which is entirely, it's like okay, so I used to teach writing in college. I worked as a writing instructor in the writing center, which meant people came to me for consultations with their papers, and I helped them develop their argument and make the paper get a better grade, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's college writing, so it was like actually difficult to get a good grade. You couldn't just have good English, you had to have understanding of the material, comprehensively address it, say something unique, all of that. And one of the most annoying things that I saw all the time was people trying to fill the word count and just trying to sound smart. It's like they just feel like they have to tick the boxes. If I have to say this, I have to say that. This is what an essay should sound like. And I would always stop them and be like, no, what do you think? Your professor wants to see your thinking, right?
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with a lot of these business articles, right? It's like we want to know we're on this website because we think SEMrush are experts, and whoever's writing for them is supposed to be an expert. We want to know what the expert thinks. We don't want to be told things just because they think we want to hear them, or things that they think sound smart. I don't care. I will think you're smart if you tell me something smart, right?
Right.
Rather than just filling all of these boxes. And so many introductions are just, yeah, they don't do that.
I've found that this is what Alora Weaver called the water is wet statement,
Yeah.
where you start it in having conversations with several freelancers. When I make these cuts on this type of opening line specifically as a blah blah blah, blah blah blah, right? Like that's essentially what we're saying here. They're like, well, I want to relate to the audience, and I want the audience to know I understand their problem. And it's like, yeah, they already know that.
But do you?
You don't. That by doing that, you're just wasting time. So,
Yeah.
So what do you do? Like, what do you do when you see an open line like this?
I start digging in, and that's what I was starting to do with my comments, right? It's let's see, okay, you started with this generic opening. We will dig into it and see what we can do, right? What does it mean for audience research to be vital, right? I'm focusing on the words in here. What does it mean that everyone has to do it? I'm looking at the specific words and asking what they mean. There's audience, there's research, there's vital part of marketing and advertising. Let's start splitting it up and see where that leads us, right? If we focus on vital part, okay, vital over what? That suggests a hierarchy, that suggests importance, that suggests relevance. Relevance for whom? Relevance in what way? What are we using to judge that? Another avenue is marketing and advertising. Okay, how are we defining marketing and advertising? Is this not vital if you're not doing marketing and advertising? What are the bounds of this, right? I feel like you can dig in into even the most generic statement and come out with something interesting, because even if you dig into the grammar, you start recognizing the ideas that are relating to each other. And if you ask yourself, what do I think about this? You will actually get an idea out there.
I love
Because
that.
if you've done your research, you know about the topic. I believe you have the idea in your head, and I want you to get it out on paper.
I love this.
Yeah.
I love that so much. Because you're right. There is a lot that's packed into that. But yeah, what does vital part of marketing and advertising mean? Like what, and just get to that.
Yeah.
Like, so, and you said here of the intro here, this is a classic hallmark of a generic intro. They've told us the concept is important, and now they are alluding to its definition without saying its definition. Tell me a little bit more.
Yeah. Yeah, so this to me is trying to appeal to everybody immediately and not knowing what their like understanding is of the concept, right? Because you're saying audience research is a vital part of marketing and advertising. So you've told me it's important for marketing, right? You haven't told me what it is. Then you say by doing blah blah blah, then you can improve messaging. And because I know what audience research is, I know that understanding the needs and pain points of these people is actually what audience research does. But if I were somebody that had never heard of that concept before, would I know that from this sentence? No. I would be like, wait, what are we talking about? What did audience research go? Why are we understanding needs and pain points, right? And so there's a clash between the first sentence and the second sentence in what we're assuming about how much the reader knows about this topic.
I want to further that just a little bit more here too. This is a piece that is clearly written for search discovery.
Yeah.
And because of that, there is already a base understanding, and this happens of so many different pieces. And I know that with what is audience research, and we start with that, it's because we're trying to go after the featured snippet, blah, 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 blah. Thing is, if somebody is already typing in what is audience research, there is a basic understanding that they are coming to this piece with, that we do not need to spell out what it is. And especially with a phrase like this, but this happens with so many other phrases, and it really, like, it's starting to grind my gears, right? Where it's when the phrase itself is almost self-defining.
Yeah.
Right? Audience research is a very self-defining phrase, and there are a lot of phrases that we go after that are very self-defining. So a lot of this stuff in the very beginning, even your next line, research aims to understand your target market in order to better know their needs, goals, and challenges. Duh. Like,
yeah.
You know, not to rip on the article too much, but like,
no,
that's one of those things where that's self-evident. So if we can take something as self-evident, how do we move the conversation forward, or build on what we can assume is some existing knowledge based on the person looking for this thing in the first place?
I want to say two things here. One is, just before we go into the rest of this, because I'm going to sound mean probably, when I edit, I assume the writer's smart.
Yep.
I always go from that base assumption. I assume the writer is intelligent. I assume they know what they're talking about. I assume that they're a good writer, right? And this is the same way I treat my team when I edit them. So when I look at sentences like that and I say, this is obvious, I'm not saying, oh, I think my writer just doesn't know enough about this. They're the wrong writer. Maybe I should have gotten more of an expert. No. I think something went wrong in terms of not knowing what's important or what might be the most interesting bit of information to put there. And that's why I dig in. It's coming from the assumption that I think the writer can do better. I believe in them, right? I believe in it. It's like, you can do it. Come on, just try, right? That's the mindset that I go into with these comments.
Yeah.
And I'd say the same here. I saw many signs that this writer is extremely smart.
Yep.
And I just wish they leveraged it more. Then the other thing I wanted to say is, I get this criticism a lot when I talk about writing and content. Everybody tells me, or a lot of people tell me, but this doesn't work for search. Like, it's nice, it's great that you like depth, but like that won't match a search query. We want the snippet, we want the definition. All right, that's fine. I've played that game. I continue to play that game for clients, but there's a way to combine the two.
Right.
For example, one of my favorite success stories that we've ever done was, a year and a half ago. It was an article for Orem, a payments API company, and it was a typical SEO outline. What are A2A payments, account-to-account payments? And what I did with it was I looked at all the definitions that everybody else had, and I realized that they didn't properly define the terms. And there were still questions like, what accounts? Are we talking accounts within one person, within one bank, account to account between banks? Right? And digging into that, I realized it was confusing and people were clashing on it. So I went in, I looked at all the definitions. I ended up pulling up a textbook, asking some people, being like, what is an account to account payment? What accounts are we talking about? How are we defining it? And I added that to the definition. And lo and behold, it had a snippet. For months, we ranked above the US government. We ranked above NerdWallet. We ranked above everybody. And it got them $500,000 through new deals, that article. And it was the definition. It was a snippet. It was basic, but also it wasn't. Right? Because we dug in.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. And I like how you're saying here too, you know, I'll be real. We've written articles with these basic SEO headings before. You're being very forward thinking in your edit here. Which actually, like, to be honest with you, I don't see that a lot on the show, where it's like,
wait, really?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not about people not being forward thinking. I don't want to say that.
Yeah,
because
but they don't do edits like that. Yeah, because your guests are phenomenal.
Right, because we're looking at single pieces that have been, you know, from other folks. But this is a really good point, especially when you're thinking about the broader context of where this piece lives, not just in the world, but in this specific time. And I think that's really important moving forward here. So,
yeah.
Cool. All right, so the heading told us to expect the definition, yet here we are being told what audience research tries to do and the components of audience research. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, and I might sound contradictory because before I was like, I don't like that they're defining things, but it's not that I don't like that they're defining things, it's that it's at the wrong place, it's the wrong kind of definition, it's the wrong kind of context, it just doesn't match.
Yeah.
Like it feels like a mishmash of definitions more than anything. And so what I was trying to say here is, yeah, the heading always sets an expectation, right? People skim often. Some people read the headings first and then go and read the rest of the article, right? And everything you say in a piece guides the reader to what to expect next. That's how they decide to keep reading. That's how they decide if it's relevant or whether to click away. And you gotta think of it, right? It's relationship building at scale. If you keep saying you're gonna do something and you never do, people aren't gonna trust you very much, right? So with your piece, do the same thing. You're giving little tests of trust in every question you ask, in every section title, in every paragraph. You're telling them, trust me that we're gonna get to this, right? Trust me that I'm gonna meet your expectation. And if you don't, the reader's frustrated. The reader feels like you don't care. The reader feels like you're not trustworthy. And you don't want that for your brand. You want them to trust you enough to then hand you over their money at some point, hopefully, right?
It's the whole concept of setups and payoffs.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Like when you look at the traditional writing, because you come from a traditional writing background,
Yeah.
right? It's setups and payoffs, and not something that's talked about nearly enough in the B2B space. But it's these headlines, these subheaders are promises. And it's like, help me get there, just give me what I need, but then also like help me ask the right questions. Like when you have a really good setup, you're getting people to ask the right question, and when you pay it off, they've kind of already expected some type of payoff, but when your payoff is just a little bit unexpected, then you've got something really good. Something I like when I do course design is getting people asking the right questions at the exact right time.
Yeah.
And that's because the setup was there at a certain point, and you build that tension up to that answer.
Yeah, and the word tension is a good one because the other way to think about it, also in fiction and art, is tension and release, right?
Yep.
This is something stand-up comics are very good at, and they talk about it pretty well. It's you're building tension because people are waiting for something. They know there's a conflict. That's the point of foreshadowing in fiction, right? The reader or the audience knows more than the character, so we're like waiting. We're like, what is going to happen? Something's off here. Like, what is going to happen? Where is the reveal? But you got to have that tension and anticipation, and then you're going to have the reveal, and the two have to match. Otherwise, it's just frustrating and annoying
and flat. If it doesn't exist, it's just flat. There's no dynamicism to it, and that's one of the things that's missing. By the way, take my course next week, and we'll talk about it.
People should sign up for Tommy's course. Yeah, anybody watching this, you should sign up.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So let's see. I mean, we're actually over 2 o'clock right now, past our time.
Sorry.
No, don't be. I would love to, well, audience, you tell me, would you like to continue going into the edit of this piece, or do you have places you need to be? There's no problem if the answer is one or the other. Well,
this is our audience research.
This is our audience research. Exactly.
We're adjusting our content based on audience expectations live. What a meta episode.
It's very much so. While we wait for the answer, because there is a bit of a delay, tell me a little bit more about some of the overall, we've got some positive things to say here. So SEMrush kills it with the graphics.
Yeah, they do.
What's your take on this? Like overall?
The article as a whole? Again, missed opportunities. I kept coming up with like questions for what I feel like could be whole other articles, like based on like one sentence here, one phrase here, one thing here. And it's frustrating to me when articles don't take that imaginative leap to dig into an interesting idea.
Where do you think the biggest missed opportunities are? I'd like to talk about those.
I have a few of these. Let me find them. Here. All right. There's a comment where I say, you know what would make a fantastic article? And it's what are the benefits of audience research? And it's the sentence that goes, most importantly, it allows marketers to connect with audiences more deeply. Are you on it?
Yep.
Yeah. So that's one example, right, of an exploration of that single point, right? What does it mean to connect with an audience? What does it mean to have different degrees of connecting with an audience? More deeply applies shallow connection, right? And kind of variety of degrees for it. understanding how that affects marketing outcomes and why is this important for marketers in particular. What can we do to understand how somebody thinks, behaves, and lives? I kind of love the whole think, behave, and live. It's so all encompassing and it makes me want to know more, right? Like on a tactical level, on a strategic level, just in terms of seeing maybe how SEMrush can do that, right? Like I feel like just that alone is such an interesting question. Like I could spend hours thinking about this and talking about this. And as somebody deep in marketing, that's the kind of discussion I want to see, right? These more digging into some. This is why your show is successful. People dig in here, right? It's so in the weeds.
Yeah.
And we're missing that because so much content in B2B is geared towards beginners,
Yeah.
which makes no sense when we're targeting professionals and when most decision makers with budgets are far enough in their careers to not want to talk about basic topics. They're really advanced. Why don't we meet them where they're at? Like, let's actually admit that we like to have deep conversations.
I love that. And I I think we have a very similar process in this regard. I will look at single lines and go, ooh,
right?
What you set me up, and then what happened here?
Yeah.
How are you? I guess this is a tough question because I don't know how I would answer it, but like,
I like it. Ask.
Ooh, how are you identifying those spots like this where you're like, because that is a learned thing, right? Because you're not taking the piece at face value. You're reading it very deeply. This is a pretty well written piece, by the way. Like this author knows how to turn phrase. But when you're looking at this, like, how are you identifying those spots where you're like, oh, take me further. I want to go down this rabbit hole, because that's something that not a lot of folks can see.
It comes down to two things, both of which we've actually talked about already. So number one is using audience research to develop that intuition, right? The barometer I was talking about. This is why I will not edit. This is why I will not write a piece before I feel like my barometer is there. Mm-hmm. And this is also why I like working with client teams and actually figuring out who knows something and asking them questions all the time, because I need to make sure that whoever's working on this piece, whether it's just me and a team, me and the client, has that intuition, because that is how we spot what's unusual. That is how we spot what's relevant. That is how we spot these places to begin with, right? That is, we have to have that knowledge of what matters, what context is there, what people often talk about, what they don't talk about, what they care about. And part two is trusting yourself, trusting your gut, trusting your intuition. Something I borderline, get mad at my writers about sometimes is being like, but what did you think is interesting? I want to know what you thought was cool. Mm-hmm. Like, tell me what you thought was cool. Tell me what you thought was boring. Where do you think this should go? And this is something that writers have to adjust to me on, right? Because they're not used to being asked that, and they think I'm full of shit. They think I'm not actually, I don't mean it. I mean it. And once people have worked with me for a bit, they get used to it, that I actually want people to chase their curiosity. I want them to chase that spark that goes, wait, this is cool. This is interesting. That's how you get an interesting article about paint drying. It's you think, okay, what would actually be cool about paint drying?
Yeah.
And then you just embrace it.
Yeah.
It's trusting yourself and embracing it.
I think that's something that, I think our research process when it comes to certain articles is very similar, where I've started entire bookmark folders where it's like, I'm going to come back to this repeatedly, and it just sits in my brain, and I get obsessive about it. But like,
me too.
The main thing for me, and this is what bothers me about when we use research and statistics. I was actually just talking with Jimmy Daly about this on his podcast, Content Briefly, by the way. If you haven't seen it, go check out that episode. We were talking about how back in the growthhackers.com days, where there was a lot of people in B2B in that forum, in an upvote community, we were all trying to push each other a little bit further. Conversion XL, I think, was one of the first that really started digging deep into the statistics. Mm-hmm. And we've overcorrected in some ways, but I think the statistics, one of the things that when people use stats, for me, that bothers me, and it's very much in line with this, is that we're not talking about the why. It's just like throwing this thing, 9 out of 10, blah, 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 C, blah, 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 and this negative thing happens. Okay, now moving on with the rest of the concept. And what I think is important Yeah, making numbers count. Okay, cool. Yeah.
I have 2 books on exactly this, because presenting numbers on its own is not enough.
Yep.
You need to know how to frame them.
Yeah. It's the whole idea of like, what does this actually mean? What are we? Why does this matter? Why are we throwing this out there? And then using that as a jumping off point to do something else and being constantly curious about that. I think I
want to add to that, if that's okay.
That's the theme, right? Is like being constantly curious.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely being constantly curious, kind of trusting yourself and chasing the curiosity, and trusting that you can combine that with all the marketing business concepts, and it can be combined with marketing outcomes, and it actually is often more effective, right? It's not separate from conversion rate optimization or looking at your stats and metrics and figuring out intent and figuring out the buying journey. It's all together, right?
Yeah.
This is not counter to that. This is just another element that I think a lot of marketers miss, right? And the other thing I wanted to say about numbers is I used to be a physics major. I ended up graduating with a literature degree, but the first 2 years of college, I was a physics major. And I do still love physics very deeply. But the reason I always loved physics was the thinking behind it. Physicists know more than most people that numbers and math are a way of thinking. It's a tool for thought. It's a tool for understanding reality. The number on its own doesn't mean anything. That stat doesn't mean anything. That stat is giving you something to understand the world, to understand the point. So what are you doing with that? What does it help you understand? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that. There's a reason why this question was asked. There's a reason why these things were quantified.
Yeah.
What is that? How can we use that to change it? I was just writing this content code for a client. And one of the things I said in there is like, if there is a stat that says 8 out of 10 people in this vertical fail, one, I want to understand why, talk about why, but then 2, as somebody who is in this field, it's not for you as the writer. You have to understand that this is not something you take at face value. It's something that you need to look at that type of statistic as a challenge, right? Like negative statistics. Yeah, or a puzzle. Like I want for the work that we do to create impact on these types of statistics.
Yeah.
And I think that's important, and I think that it's important that we look at that type of research as well, to make meaning of it.
That's the beautiful thing about business. Unlike the laws of physics, the laws of business are made up by people, right? So we can change the numbers. We can change the logic under which they operate. We can change the concepts. And I think that's really cool.
It is. And we have the ability as writers to make tangible impact on the world. Like words have power. And I say this thing from time to time where it's 2 things have changed the impact of 2 things have changed the course of history, and it's weapons and words. And which one do you think led to the other one?
Words.
Right.
Okay, I keep pulling books off my shelf, but one more. If anybody wants to truly understand the power of words, and especially if they care about the American political context as well as in this election year, no better book than this.
Yes.
This goes into everything that the Republican Party has been doing with words, with language, with how they frame ideas to shape laws and to get us to the situation where we are in now. If you argue with me that words don't have power, I'm going to throw this book because they do.
There's a
there's
a Nerd Writer episode, just to kind of tie it back to something we talked about before, and then we got to wrap it up. But there's a Nerd Writer episode about how Trump constructs a tweet, and it's fascinating because it shows you, I don't typically get political on the show, but and that's not what this is about. It's the idea of the construction of words, how this stuff puts together, that's the core, that's the foundation of everything. And
exactly.
We have to understand the underlying structure of that, but beyond that, tie it back to the audience research part. We have to understand how our audience will receive certain words and then find content market fit. And that's what the audience research is ultimately about.
Yes. Also, I know we have to wrap up, but as I said before, I don't like breaking promises to my audience, right? Because that's how you build trust. You need to meet your promises. And in one of my LinkedIn posts, I mentioned a specific comment that I left in this document, which was great on a t-shirt, not great on a blog post. I feel like I have to show people what I was talking about, because otherwise I did not meet their expectations.
Yes, where is it? Where is it?
It is right above. It's what are the benefits of audience research? Last sentence in that section. It's buyer personas, humanize audience research, and ensure that you speak to the customers, the right customers in the right way. That's what I was talking about. It's like, that's a great slogan, but I don't know what it means in this blog post, right? It's cool. I might have a mug with it or a t-shirt. I could see the t-shirt, but I don't know what speaking to the right customers in the right way actually adds for me in this article, right? And as a reader trying to upskill or learn about audience research. It's not actionable. It's pretty words, not actionable.
They turn their phrases really well, but
Yeah. Oh, this writer's awesome. There's some phrases here that I was like, wow, like this is a way I've never heard this described before. Like, again, I honestly think this writer could have done something so wonderful.
Well, and that's why we have the show. That's how we dig into these to these a little bit more and try to get more out of these pieces. All right.
Yeah.
Mariya,
right.
I could do this all day. I could talk with you.
Me too. Clearly, we can definitely do this.
But
this is fun.
But we are about 22 minutes over time right now.
Oops.
No. Where can folks find you? But then also, actually, do you have any parting words for the audience? And then also, where can folks find you?
My parting words would be, realize that you can get marketing advice and marketing takeaways and become a better marketer by looking at things that aren't marketing content, right? We talked so much about our inspirations here from all kinds of things. There's the people you're trying to reach are on the same internet as everybody watching cat videos. Mm-hmm. So something about those cat videos actually is relevant competitor research to you. So, I'll just leave people with that, with that thought. As for where to find me, I'm probably going to be the loudest marketer in the room, jumping around, talking about SparkToro.
Wonderful.
But actually, I'm on LinkedIn as Mariya Delano. I am on Mastodon. I'm on Threads. I have a newsletter called ADMD. It's admdnewsletter.com. And I think if you Google me, I come up. I don't know.
Perfect.
You can find me.
Perfect. We'll find you. Also, I'll be adding you to our Twitter. I refuse to call it the other name. Guests. I have a guest playlist or a guest list where we can follow you and anybody else who has been on the show.
Right.
If you would like to learn more about the Cutting Room, go to thecontentstudio.com/the-cutting-room, or better, become a studio insider by going to thecontentstudio.com/studio insider to get updates on the Cutting Room, but also 5 weekly links as to what's interesting to us. Very interesting stuff for me. I like to tie B2B marketing to filmmaking techniques and draw parallels there.
I love it.
Thank you.
Yeah. I love it a lot.
That's probably
also, if you want to find the Cutting Room on YouTube, do not just look up the Cutting Room. Really weird stuff comes up.
Ooh.
Look up the Cutting Room Tommy Walker.
Yeah,
that's when it comes up.
That's a good point. There's a scary movie that's also called The Cutting Room.
Yeah, there's all kinds of really weird stuff that comes up. I was like, oh god, no.
There's a club in New York too, by the way. But yeah.
Oh really?
Yeah,
I should go.
Yeah, they're a music club.
Right.
They have good bands. Anyways, thank you so much, everybody, for watching.
Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate it.
A great rest of the afternoon.
Yeah. Feel free to DM me with your thoughts if you want. I'd love to see what people